Win any interaction without speaking, Nietzsche's secret revealed. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the energy shift, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't say? Have you ever met someone who seemed to command respect, attention, or even admiration without uttering a single word? That kind of presence, raw, magnetic, undeniable, is not an accident. It's the manifestation of something deeper, something ancient, something Nietzsche understood better than almost anyone. And in a world obsessed with articulation, with noise, with constant expression, silence, the right kind of silence, has become the most powerful voice. So here's the question. How can we win any interaction without speaking, not just socially, but existentially? How can we walk through the world in such a way that others feel our truth, our depth, our presence, without us needing to convince or explain? Nietzsche's secret lies not in performance, but in being. Not in the manipulation of appearances, but in the cultivation of inner power. And that's where this journey begins, not with technique, but with transformation. We've been trained to believe that influence comes from clever words, from charisma, from persuasive arguments. But Nietzsche dismantles that assumption. He says, no, influence comes from will, from a soul that has wrestled with itself, from a person who has faced the abyss and returned, not broken but forged. The person who needs nothing from the world can walk into any room and bend it. Why? Because they are not seeking approval, they bring their own gravity. This is the foundation of what Nietzsche calls the sovereign individual, a human being who is not swayed by the herd, not defined by culture, not imprisoned by fear. This person doesn't need to speak much because their very being speaks louder than words. Their silence is not emptiness, it is density. It's the silence of someone who has done the inner work, someone who has bled in solitude, questioned everything, and emerged with clarity. That kind of presence is rare, but it's possible, and it changes everything.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Think about it. Have you ever felt someone's energy before they said a word? That's not magic, that's metaphysics. That's what Nietzsche would call the will to power in its most refined form, not domination over others, but mastery over self. When you've mastered your impulses, your dependencies, your need to be understood, you become a force. Not because you control others, but because you no longer need to. You've become the still point in a spinning world. This is why your silence matters more than your voice, because in silence you reveal the quality of your being. If your silence is insecure, others feel it. If your silence is grounded, others sense it. You don't need to posture. You don't need to impress. You just are. And in this state of being, you win the interaction, not by overpowering, but by out-extinguishing. You become the reference point. Others adjust to your frequency. But Nietzsche would warn us, this kind of presence cannot be faked. It must be earned. And that earning comes through pain, through confrontation, through a radical stripping away of false identities. You must ask yourself, what parts of me are performative? What parts of me are borrowed? What am I afraid to lose? Until you face those questions, your silence will always be hollow. It will be the silence of suppression, not sovereignty. So here's the challenge. Stop trying to be impressive. Stop trying to be liked. Stop trying to win through noise. Instead, build yourself quietly, relentlessly. Build the kind of self that speaks through stillness. The kind of self that, when you walk into a room, carries a presence that words could never match. That is Nietzsche's secret. And it's not a trick. It's a path. A hard one, but a real one. And along this path, something strange happens. You start to notice that the world begins to listen to you. Not because you're talking, but because you've become worth listening to. Your silence becomes a mirror, a challenge, a provocation. People begin to question themselves in your presence. Why does this person not flinch? Why do they not compete? Why are they not needy? And in that questioning, you've already won, because you've revealed to them a higher possibility of being without saying a word. Now, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what would it take for me to be fully silent and still be unmistakably powerful? What would I have to let go of? What would I need to become? That's not a superficial question. That's the key to changing how you move through life. Not louder, but deeper. Not faster, but truer. This is the art of invisible dominance. Not through control, but through fullness. And remember, the most powerful beings don't need to dominate. They don't need to shout. They don't even need to explain. They simply exist. And their existence rewrites the room. That's not charisma. That's not strategy. That's truth. And Nietzsche's entire philosophy was about becoming that truth. At any cost. The will to power. Becoming the person others adjust to. To understand how to win any interaction without speaking, we have to go deeper into the very nature of power itself. And Nietzsche gives us a framework that most people misunderstand. The will to power is not about domination in the traditional sense. It's not about control over others. It's about the intensity of being, the fullness of your existence, the degree to which you've transformed your inner chaos into clarity, your fear into force, your confusion into command. When Nietzsche talks about the will to power, he's talking about becoming so internally complete, so self-defined, that the world bends to accommodate your presence. Not because you force it to, but because it recognizes something unshakable in you. But here's the twist. This kind of power has nothing to do with speaking louder, arguing better, or performing confidence. It has everything to do with the aura you generate through how you live. Your discipline, your solitude, your pain, your integrity. It's about becoming so coherent, so inwardly aligned, that your very presence becomes an event. People feel it. They don't know why, but they lean in. They adjust themselves. They second-guess their masks when they're around you. Why? Because you're not wearing one. And most people are. Most people walk through life with layers of performance. They've learned to adapt, to fit in, to please, to survive. They shape-shift based on context. But Nietzsche challenges that entire paradigm. He says, become the context. Stop adapting to every external situation. Start creating the internal conditions that make others adapt to you. That's the will to power. Not external force, but internal gravity. You become a center of mass, a sovereign orbit. And when you walk into a room, people feel the difference between someone who's been shaped by the world and someone who has shaped themselves. This is why silence becomes your weapon, because when you've cultivated that kind of inner strength, you don't need to speak to be understood. You don't need to argue to be right. Your stillness becomes more persuasive than anyone else's noise. Silence in this context is not absence, it's presence. It's a statement. It says, I am not moved by this chaos. And people are drawn to that, because most of them are secretly lost in their own noise. They crave anchors, they crave figures who bring stillness into their storm. You become that figure not by pretending, but by becoming. Now ask yourself, what would it take for me to be that unmoved center? What fears would I have to confront? What illusions would I have to destroy? Because this isn't a trick you use in social interactions. This is a transformation that touches your entire life. It's about becoming someone who doesn't flinch under pressure, who doesn't dilute themselves for comfort, who doesn't shrink in the face of disapproval. And, ironically, when you become that person, people begin to respect you more, not less, because you've done what they haven't dared to do. You've become yourself fully. Nietzsche's will to power is not about crushing others. It's about rising so fully into your being that others are inspired, challenged, or even unsettled by your existence. You don't need to manipulate, you don't need to posture, you don't need to dominate. You simply exist in a way that radiates authenticity. And that authenticity becomes power, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that commands it. Silently. This is the secret to winning interactions without speaking. Become the person who no longer needs to win them. Become the person who is so rooted in their values, so clear in their knowing, so committed to their path that others instinctively fall into alignment or fall away. And both outcomes are victories, because you're no longer interacting to gain something, you're simply being and letting the world respond. The maskless life. How to radiate power without needing it. Here's the paradox most people never resolve. The more you need power, the less of it you have. The moment you chase influence, validation, admiration, you've already surrendered the very essence of what makes you powerful. Nietzsche understood this contradiction at the core of the human psyche. He saw that most people are not truly living, they're performing. They wear masks not because they want to deceive, but because they're afraid that who they really are won't be enough. But the moment you live without masks, without the desperate need to be seen a certain way, something radical happens. You begin to radiate power. Not the kind that comes from ego, but the kind that comes from freedom. Freedom is the source of all real power. And freedom begins when you stop trying to curate your identity for others. When you stop asking, how should I act here? And instead ask, what is true here for me? Most people live as fractured versions of themselves, adjusting their behavior like chameleons depending on what room they're in. But Nietzsche would look at that and say, you don't exist yet. To exist in the Nietzschean sense is to be indivisible, to be whole, to be someone who doesn't toggle between masks because they've burned every mask they ever wore. That's what makes your silence powerful, because it's not the silence of someone hiding, it's the silence of someone who no longer needs to perform. But to live without masks is terrifying. It means you have to face the possibility that some people won't like the real you, that you might face rejection, misunderstanding, even isolation. And, Nietzsche would say, good, because in that crucible, you find out who you really are. You find out what you actually believe, what you truly value, what you're willing to lose in order to keep your soul intact. The person who walks through life with no mask has nothing to protect, but also nothing to fear. And that makes them deeply magnetic. Others sense it. They don't know how to name it, but they feel it. It's the presence of someone who is not acting powerful. They simply are. And when you reach that level of being, you don't even want to dominate interactions anymore. You don't need to win conversations. You don't need to be admired. You're not addicted to the gaze of the other. You become whole in yourself, so you can enter any interaction not from lack, but from abundance. You bring energy instead of needing it. You offer presence instead of demanding attention. And this subtle reversal is what makes you powerful without saying a word. But don't mistake this for detachment. It's not about being cold or aloof or distant. True maskless living is warm, vivid, real. It's about being deeply present, because you're no longer distracted by the question of how you're being perceived. You're not calculating your next move. You're not editing your truth. You're simply there, fully in your body, in your spirit, in your reality. And that kind of presence cannot be faked. It's something that people feel in their gut, and they trust it. Even if they don't like you, they respect you, because you've chosen to stop wearing the armor they're still trapped in. So ask yourself, which parts of my personality are still a performance? Which of my beliefs are shaped more by social approval than by my own inner knowing? These are not casual questions. These are existential detonators. And if you ask them with sincerity, they will blow apart the false self you've been carrying for years. That's the price of the maskless life. But the reward is greater than anything you could imagine. Peace, not comfort, not ease, but peace. The peace that comes from knowing you are no longer fragmented, that you've chosen to live in alignment with your core no matter the cost. This is how you radiate power without needing it, by no longer being a slave to perception, by no longer adjusting your truth to fit the room, by becoming so rooted in your own being that your mere presence becomes a statement. You don't have to speak to influence, you don't have to argue to be heard. You are the message. You are the mirror. You are the reminder that it is possible to be fully alive, fully real, and the silent revolution when your presence becomes a challenge to the world. There's a moment in every philosophical journey when the question stops being, how do I change the world, and becomes, how do I stop the world from changing me? That's the moment you realize that the greatest revolution you can participate in is not one of words or systems, but of being. Nietzsche's vision was never about external revolt, it was about internal rebellion. A rebellion against the smallness you were taught to accept, a rebellion against the masks you were told to wear, a rebellion against the soft, silent obedience that kills the soul slowly over a lifetime. And when you commit to that rebellion, truly commit, your very presence becomes a threat to everything that is false. Without even speaking, you become a challenge to the world. Why? Because most people have never met someone who is actually free. Most people have spent their entire lives negotiating with fear, trading pieces of their authenticity for safety, approval, belonging. So when they encounter someone who has stopped negotiating, someone who has chosen truth over comfort, it forces a confrontation, not an argument, not a debate, a mirror. Your existence becomes a mirror, and people see themselves in it. Clearly, maybe for the first time, and not everyone will like what they see. Some will admire you, some will resent you, but all will be affected. That's power. And you didn't even have to speak. This is the silent revolution, not a war of ideologies, but a rupture in the fabric of conditioned reality. It begins the moment you stop living reactively, the moment you stop asking, "What should I be?" and start asking, "What am I beneath all the noise?" The moment you stop trying to become impressive and start becoming true. And as that truth hardens into form, as it becomes your posture, your gaze, your silence, it begins to shift others. Not because you're trying to change them, but because your existence makes it impossible for them to remain asleep. And yes, it will be lonely at times. Yes, you will lose people. Yes, you will be misunderstood. But Nietzsche would say, good, that means you're doing it right. That means you're shedding the false alliances, the shallow recognitions, the flattering lies. You're becoming someone who doesn't just survive the world, but transfigures it by refusing to be shaped by it. And the irony is, once you need nothing from others, once you stop speaking just to be heard, you'll be heard louder than ever, because your silence will carry the weight of someone who has become. So here's the final question. What if your greatest gift to the world isn't what you say, but who you are when you say nothing at all? Sit with that. Let it undo you. Let it strip away the noise. Because when you stop trying to win interactions, when you stop trying to be powerful, you become the revolution. Quietly, silently, completely. And the world will have no choice but to listen.